Welcome to another episode of Pour and Tell, brought to you by Developing Palates. I'm your host, John Cigar Surgeon McTavish, here as always with Jiunn Liu. Jiunn, how's your week going, brother?
Week has been, you know, both of us are in corporate world, right? So I look forward to Friday night and into the
Mhm.
weekend. And this is no different. And I look forward to it every single week. So,
I find, not to diminish our cigar shows, because I enjoy our cigar shows, but it's a little bit easier for me doing a libation show on a Saturday morning than it is doing a cigar review on a Monday night after my first day back in the corporate world.
yeah, it is. And plus, like, I mean, we no doubt all of us love cigars at Developing Palace, right? It's like, but it is it's different. Like, I have to make sure that I have the time for it, that I'm able to smoke. Worth like drinking something, it's hey, let's just pour it. It takes like what 2 seconds to pour something to start drinking and enjoying it, right? So
It's it really, I mean, not to discount doing a review, but it is a lot easier in terms of setup and overall structure to do a libation review than it is to do a cigar review. I
yep.
find, like, I don't have to worry about the weather. If it's raining, it doesn't matter. I can still pour a whiskey,
Yeah,
right?
good point.
Yeah,
Very good point.
doesn't really matter. So, recap for the week, I managed to do the 50-second consecutive. I don't know how this happened, but I managed to do the 50-second consecutive week of beer reviews on our site. So,
Nice.
kind of marks our 1 year. Capped it off with an interesting beer from a local brewery, which it seems like I'm doing a lot of local stuff these days. I mean, it works out well. From Red Bison Brewery, it's the Altamira Stout. I wasn't sure going into it how it was going to be because it's kind of on the low ABV. I think it's below 6,
Hmm.
and a lot. I don't know if you get this, but a lot of times when I do a stout below 6%, I find it kind of thin.
Yeah, body. It usually compromises the body for me.
Right. Same.
Yeah.
So I was very surprised because it had just a monster amount of flavor to it, like just big coffee, big chocolate, big malty characters. So I was like, this is kind of nice because you can get all those big stout flavors without getting blasted by 10.5% alcohol.
That's an interesting point you bring up because I feel like if I'm drinking a lower ABV stout or like a porter, it almost have to do like a mind trick on me to say it has to be so flavorful that I kind of forget about the body,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
and there's some really good ones out there that's of that, particular that type that I was just talking about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. So that ended up being a 6.42, which is pretty good on our scale. For those of you unfamiliar with our scale, too bad, so sad. Just kidding. Think the
and
easy
it's
way.
not difficult.
What's that?
It is not difficult.
It's not difficult. The way to think of it is, Aaron put this really well. It's a scale of satisfaction, with one being completely dissatisfied and 10 being completely satisfied. A 642 means I was satisfied. It was a good experience. I wasn't completely satisfied because a 10 out of 10 is pretty amazing. My eyes are gonna have to pop out of my skull, and I'm gonna have to pass out from the taste experience, and that's probably not gonna happen. So a 642 on our scale, that's pretty good.
And so far we have not on the cigar front nor on the libation front we've had anything rated a perfect 10 out of 10.
I'm not even sure. I'm trying to think if we've even had anything broach the 9 scale.
Our buddy Seth has broached a nice scale.
I like Seth's enthusiasm. It's fun.
Yeah.
Last night I had the opportunity. I was over at a good friend's house enjoying a cigar, and he busted out a pretty impressive whiskey from Edradour. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to have Edradour. Very small distillery from Scotland. Hard to get a hold of. They weren't really exporting a lot of stuff until a few years ago, so you kind of had to be down in Scotland to get your hands on it. Anyways, all that to say, it's a 21-year-old, so already kind of on the good side. Cask strength, so it's 56.2% alcohol by volume. That's, pretty good.
It's out there,
And then it's a first, or not a first fill, pardon me. I think it's actually a first fill, but it's matured entirely in an Oloroso sherry butt for
Oh
the
wow.
for the entire 21 years. So
Dang.
so you look at the
Is it?
bottle.
Oh,
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, it's blood. Like, it looks like blood, like it's dark.
I was about to say it's probably a bit it sounds a bit overwhelming on sherry.
That was my worry, right? Because and that's why you don't see a lot of whiskeys that are distilled and matured in sherry butts for that long because the sherry can easily take over the whiskey.
Right.
But I'll tell you, it was magical. It was just kind of all the great things of sherry without being overpowering. It didn't blast my palate. It wasn't this huge spice.
Mm.
I just kind of got this really nice jammy almond, tarty taste, and then it finished with just a really long, sweet, jammy raspberry, and then kind of some cherries. I mean, I didn't pour a
Oh.
lot because I think he said the bottle was $475 Canadian. So it was nice to be offered. I'm gonna be nice and only pour myself kind of a half-ounce pour because I'm not an
Yeah.
animal, right? But I'll tell you, pretty impressive. Pretty good whiskey to start the weekend, I would say. How was your week? What did you get into for libations this week?
Um, a couple of things to note, not a ton, but one night I came home and I pour myself. It's from it's from Nikka, Japanese whiskey. So Nikka Whiskey Distilling. I have it here for people that actually want to watch these episodes with us. So not sure if you can see. So this is the Nikka whiskey from the barrel. So this is barrel strength. This used to be only being able to picked up, I believe, at duty free or in Japan itself. So just within, I believe, the last year or to like the last year and a half, they started importing this. So we actually get it in the States now, thank God. This is just it's a good whiskey, man. Like this is about 65 to $70 USD. Um, you know, what I really like about this is it's not although it's barrel strength, it's not you don't taste like it. It's incredibly well balanced. Like,
Doesn't have
and
that
it's
big
very
alcohol
interesting.
punch up front.
No, there's not that ethanol burn. Nosing the whiskey doesn't give you a big wallop of that like gas, like ethanol kind of a thing to it, which I really dislike. So no, it's great. And it's interesting because when I drink a lot of kind of barrel strength slash cask strength whiskey, I typically drink those from on the American whiskey side, like on the bourbons and rye sort of things.
Right, right.
And they're great because they're such a like I mean, rawness is not the right word, but like there's such a punchy aspect to American whiskey.
The word I always use, I either call it it's not nuanced or it's not subtle, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of everything's dialed to 10 on the flavor scale.
Yes. Absolutely. And that's typical American stuff, man. Like I feel like everything we do in America, like a lot of it is just like, hey, let's take that particular item and let's just jam a ton of like power and
Salt,
like
sugar,
salt,
alcohol.
sugar, like amplified to like level 10, right? And there's good in that, but I like more balance, nuance, complexity. So it was a really nice treat to go back to this Nika Barrel whiskey. So
Was that
yeah, I mean,
51.6%?
yeah. So this guy is 51.4%.
Nice.
In terms of is non-age stated, which I still don't like that, but I'm not gonna bitch anymore. I just hope that I just hope that the whiskey is good. Um, yeah, like a lot of like toffee. There's caramel, vanilla, some really nice like stewed fruit to it. Like like a like like big pies and that kind of thing. Like, but all of this is like really nice and inviting, and it's like a nice warming sensation. And instead of like you drink something like cask strength bourbon and like I literally a lot of cask strength bourbon, I have to take that first sip and basically coat the entire whiskey kind of within my palate,
Yeah, absolutely.
just let it sit there, just purely so that my palate could get used to the alcohol before that.
Palate shock is a real thing. Absolutely.
Yeah,
100%.
and I have to do it. But with something like this, I nose it and I drink it and I'm good to go.
Nice. That
So
sounds like a great experience. I am also, obviously, we've talked about this many times, but I am also a huge fan of Japanese whiskey. I like as you say, the Japanese approach to really everything is nuance and subtlety and layers, and sometimes it takes a little bit to get into it, but if you can get into it, there's some pretty amazing beverages out there for sure.
Yeah, and there's such a dichotomy between like a lot of like hardcore bourbon guys, like American whiskey guys, and like Japanese whiskey guys. Like it's almost like you're cut from two different grains,
Yeah.
right? Like because one guy's like the bourbon guys will say, Japanese whiskey, that's great. No, I don't know why it's worth all of that freaking money because it's so watered down. And I'm like, you don't understand. It's not watered down. It's complex. It's nuanced. There's subtleties.
And it and
But yeah,
and I mean, you're a great example of a guy who enjoys a lot of bourbon, but that doesn't mean that the only thing you're gonna drink is bourbon. It just means that you can enjoy, for lack of a better word, you can enjoy a range of intensity for flavors from full bodied to nuanced to subtle to whatever. And whatever, man.
yeah, yeah. And this absolutely parallels to how I view cigars as well, right? Like a lot of non-Cuban cigar smokers think that Cuban cigars are flavorless, right? But that's not true, right? Like there's Cuban cigars for the most part is not going to give you that increase in that punchiness and strength that perhaps a Nicaraguan cigar will, but it is every bit as flavorful as non-Cuban cigars. Just very different,
Y-
right? Very
Yeah,
different
I think
styles.
I think there's and this is very true in the spirit world. I think, we was talking about stouts earlier, and I was talking about how I was enjoying a stout that didn't have high ABV, and I think there is this unintended thing that people link the punchiness, the intensity with body, and they think that if it's not dialed to 10, it doesn't have any body. And I mean, there couldn't be anything further from the truth. You can have a very complex body without completely overwhelming your palate. And I think Cubans, I mean, we don't talk about cigars really a lot on the show, but Cuban tobacco is probably a great example of that, where you can have something very complex, lots of layers, doesn't overwhelm the palate. Japanese whiskey to me that's the analog for me for whiskeys is tons of complexity, but sometimes you have to go searching for it. You have to think about it. You have to
Yeah.
examine it with your palate. So, yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes honestly, dude, like I don't even want to search for it. Like sometimes I just want to like crack open something and I just want to like I call it my Tuesday whiskey, right? Like where I just want to just enjoy a good pour of
Yeah,
whiskey without thinking much about
absolutely.
it. Right. So if which is how I feel most of the time on the weekdays, like so a lot of times Japanese whiskey doesn't fit the
Yep,
bill for me. So
makes sense.
anyways, and the very next one that I wanted to talk about was, it was interesting because when I hang out with my coworkers, I typically don't enjoy what we're drinking because those guys are more like, oh, let's get shit faced and get shots and
Coors
whatever, right?
Banquet.
Yeah, yeah, basically. Um, so, so yesterday after work, you know, at my company we have certain events and they bring in beer and whatever, so we found some beer that's on the bottom floor of our building, and my coworker brought up all these like various beers, and I happened to pick up a beer in Hawaii. The brewery is called Kona Brewing Company.
Sounds very Hawaiian.
um, yes, very Hawaiian, very popular. uh, and they have a IPA called Castaway IPA. So, it's true to kind of like a lot of Hawaiian style beer. It's basically has added tropical fruits in it. And I believe this one has, um, I want to say this one has passion fruit in it that they added.
Funky.
Yeah, but you know, bitterness wise, like 50 IBU, very low, very drinkable, very approachable, 6% alcohol by volume. So it's a very approachable IPA. And I really enjoyed it. Like, you know, there's so much like hazy IPAs out there, like milkshake hazy IPAs, West Coast IPAs. So you just try to like jam as much flavor into that clouded, you know, cloudy beer that people love so much. Um, it was really nice to like take a step away from that and just kind of, I guess, drink like a constantly readily available um, beer that you could pick up at your local store, especially California and the West Coast in general. And I really liked it, man. It was really refreshing. It kind of gets quenched my thirst. Um, and I really enjoyed it. And you know, but I do want to say there's a difference between enjoying something like this and like enjoying or lack of enjoyment of like drinking like a fucking Coors Light, right? Because first of all, I don't want to support them because I'd rather support the quote unquote mom and pop breweries that's local to me, um, and I still do, and I still will. But yeah, this was just a good reminder of like June. Don't be a fucking snob all the time. There's some good shit out there that's not just the hazies that's gonna get can released every week.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for me, part of the fun with the beer reviews has been trying stuff that might be, for bet lack of a better expression, outside of my normal wheelhouse for flavor style, or outside of my wheelhouse for. 'Cause I think you do get into, even as a reviewer, you get into a habit of kind of going to your go-to distilleries, or, whatever. And I think there's a limitation to that, because your inherent biases are kicking in, so you're only buying styles that you enjoy from distilleries breweries, sorry, that you typically go to. And so it's nice to get out of that rut, as it were, and a lot of times you can find stuff that you weren't expecting. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So getting into libation news for the week, some interesting stuff. We touched on a bunch of stuff last week. This week, the big one for me, I wasn't really expecting this, and I don't know how interesting this is to our listeners, but I found it fascinating. So one of the things in the Scotch distillery industry is that when you malt barley, so malting barley is obviously an important step in whiskey making, whether it's bourbon or whether it's Scotch whiskey, you have to malt the barley. And malting barley involves cooking barley, shoveling it. Now, modern industrial malting facilities exist. They do it all in a machine. It's a lot less work because nobody wants to shovel tons of barley that's being smoked over the course of 12 or 18 hours. It's a
Mm.
terrible job. It's backbreaking work. It's great to employ people, but most distilleries have moved a long way from that. All of that to lead into Bruichladdich has decided they're going back to malting their own barley.
So help me understand, John, is so why are they doing this? Is it better control of the malted barley and the better quality of it and selection? What is
They
it?
say. Now, I took some notes here because I had the same question. Like, it seems like it's going backwards. I mean, there's something to be said about craft and small batch, but at a certain point, you got to question some of these moves. They say their goal is to reduce carbon footprint and give them creative control over the malting process. Part of me looks at that and says, well, first of all, there's no way that you can control carbon footprint as an individual malter versus an industrial facility. The whole point of an industrial facility is that it's extremely efficient, and like the whole process is extremely efficient. So I'm not sure I buy into the first one.
Hmm.
Creative control over the maltings, I mean, I guess, I'm not an expert on malting barley. I know I've talked to distillery managers about malting process. I've heard a lot of different opinions, from the barley and the malting process has minimal impact on the final spirit, to
Oh,
the malting process is one of the key components in the final spirit. So it's I think it's one of those things, a little bit like the cigar industry, where everyone has their own take on things and they're going to do it their own way. Everyone thinks their way maybe is the right way. I don't know that that's necessarily the attitude, but you get that sometimes where they say, "Well, our way is better, and here's why." It's just it's a curious turn in the industry.
yeah, and I definitely don't know how to make like the details of how to make whiskey at all in general, just within end-to-end process of making whiskey, right? So, um, and I never will. I mean, I could read about it, I could talk to different distilleries and owners and whatnot, but everyone's always gonna. I feel like there's so many people that gives like vastly different answers to the same
Yeah.
question that I don't really know how to approach who's right, who's wrong. I really enjoy it though because I feel like regardless of whatever your opinion is, let's if you could back it up by science and lab results. Um, this is a part of why I enjoy whiskey, right? Like that's why there's so many different brands and distilleries and the whole like concept of like what really is behind this brand and this bottle, because a lot of it is sourced,
Yep.
right? Not everyone, very few people could just go out there and make whiskey. It's incredibly you know, time sensitive, like time heavy sort of a product to
A lot of
make.
money, man. A lot of money.
Yeah, and it's shit ton of money. Like your ROI is like absolute crap for a few
Mhm.
years. So,
And one of the interesting
you
things
know,
about Bruichladdich, and I didn't talk about this, but they actually use 100% Scottish grown barley, and 42% of the barley is actually grown in and around the, I don't know if you call it a county that Bruichladdich is located in.
hmm, interesting. And that makes me wonder, like, okay, especially the stuff that's grown locally. People always talk about like the terroir of where the raw ingredients come from, right? And how that makes a big difference. Certainly, people talk mainly about that and how much of an influence it has over like the wine industry, hugely impacted by grapes. But with something like whiskey and barley, I mean, you just said you're talking to some industry folks and they're saying, yeah, it doesn't really matter that much where it is grown and how it's malted. And then some others say, no, it matters quite a bit,
Yeah,
right? So I don't know, but it is cool. Like I'm all for um, you know, distilleries like and brands that want to make their own, want to go organic and try out all this stuff. That's cool, man. Like I'm more interested at the end of the day at within what's in the bottle and the final product, how it may taste different though. I mean that's the end of the day. Like no bullshit. What does it taste like,
totally
right?
agree.
So
In other industry news, one of the giants in the whiskey industry, Bushmills, Irish whiskey, they, I think, are one of the biggest whiskey makers in the world. They've decided that they're going to expand and build a second distillery on their existing site. So that's a pretty big move because you don't, like we were just talking about, the ROI on whiskey is not great. Investing money in whiskey, I mean, so to give you a sense of it, it's a 30 million pound distillery, 30 million pounds, Irish English pounds. That's a lot of money. I think that's what,
oof,
45 million, 43 million US dollars. That's a significant sum of money. Now they can do that because obviously there's a world demand for whiskey. So hopefully that demand continues. What this means for the distillery is that they're going to have 8 new washbacks, 10 new copper pot stills, which we can talk about whiskey manufacturing in another episode. But that's a lot of capacity. That's a significant capacity. They say that that effectively is going to double their overall distilling capacity, and the total amount of spirit per year is going to be 9 million liters, which I think works out to I think just under 2 million gallons. I think is the math of that. So that's a heck of a lot of whiskey every year.
huh. Um, that's great
That's great
news,
news.
right? That's great news for all of us in general. I don't care that just like whiskey, right? Um, I think it's great. There's definitely a boom. Like I know within the boom that's more within stateside, in Kentucky in the distilleries there, but there seems like there's definitely the same kind of boom that's going on within Europe. And I love this. I mean, I'm not much of an Irish whiskey drinker. I'm gonna have to get up to like Redbreast 21 and stuff like that, like really high end stuff in which I was like, okay, this is gonna be worthwhile buying. But aside from that, it's not really the point. But I think this is great news, and I hope they continuously do well. I'm all for being a component of brown spirits, and this is a big
Yeah,
win in that
yeah,
sense.
absolutely. What's kind of interesting to me is I enjoy Irish whiskey. I obviously enjoy a lot of Scottish whiskey too. Irish whiskey, old Irish whiskey is kind of hard to come by and also very expensive comparative to Scotch whiskey, which is kind of interesting. But I've had some older Irish whiskey and I can't say I've ever been disappointed. It's all been some pretty fantastic stuff. So
Yeah,
good job to Bushmills. Be interesting to see what they come out with. Maybe it'll mean some of the older expressions will come out as a result of increasing capacity. Who knows?
yeah.
Last this week, kind of some Canadian beer news. So I don't have you followed at all? I don't know if you know who Wayne Gretzky is. Just,
Yeah.
it's hockey, so
He's
right.
yeah,
Right.
legend. I'm not a big hockey guy, but I mean, certainly, from watching Mighty Ducks and stuff like those things. No, he's one of the
All-time
all-time
greats.
greats. So
So he, of
yeah,
course, launched a rye spirit a while ago. I think it's got to be going on 4 or 5 years. I actually haven't had the opportunity to try it. He called it the number 99, which was his name or his number when he was playing hockey. That was his famous number. I guess he's done some expansion. He just recently or announced the launch that they're going to do craft brewing, Wayne Gretzky craft brewing. I kind of have
interesting.
mixed feelings about this, but the first release they say is going to be a number 99 rye lager, 5% ABV. It's going to be basically standard beer, but then they're going to add Canadian winter rye to kind of give it that rye character, that rye zest and spice,
Like
right?
Spice Kick and all that.
So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting. Again, I kind of have mixed feelings from the perspective of my experience with any sort of, shall we say, collaboration or interaction with a celebrity in terms of the spirit or beer world. It's not been good, and that could just be my internal bias, but I can't say that that's ever like I would say 75% of the time I can just automatically discount it as not being enjoyable. Now I
Mm.
have not had the number 99 rye whiskey. It's on my list to try, but I do have some reservations about beer because there are a lot of beer entrants, especially in the Canadian market now. Obviously, there's a lot of great beer in the United States. I'm not sure it gets me really excited to try the beer, you know?
I agree. I'm totally on point with you. I think typically collaborations, especially paired with a celebrity such as this, doesn't typically pan out to be a great tasting product. I could think of countless, you know, things in which it just didn't really pan out. Like, but I mean, at the end of the day, like it's gonna sell, right? Like that's why people are doing it, right? Like, and it's not even like I'll even go as far as to say it's not just celebrity collabs. Like, I'm not too sure about the Canadian, especially beer scene up there, but in the states, there's definitely within the beer scene collabs that happen between breweries, and they come together and they'll brew like a whatever IPA, let's say, and then they'll release it. So it's like brewery to brewery collab. And I honestly don't really understand the point of collab because the whole point of you having your brewery, right, is you want to present an expression that you believe is true to your own taste buds, your heart, etc., right? Like your own
Yep.
palate. And then you go with somebody else in which it's that usually doesn't quite agree with the same notions as kind of what you have in mind and your tasting profile, and you try to bring out a product to the general consensus and to say, okay, we collaborated and we did this style, right? And usually, like I would say, 90+% of the time, it
Absolutely.
fails, right? Like, um, I mean, the thing about Wayne Gretzky's Rye Lager is it sounds very approachable to the masses, which is a good thing. Um, so I think there may be some wins in that game, right? So it's not like he could wait. It's not like Gretzky's coming out and be like, "I'm gonna make a
Barrel
12%,
aged sour.
barrel aged imperial stout,
Exactly.
right? And I'm gonna throw in rye, and I'm gonna throw in fucking soy sauce and anise and
Yep.
whatever, right? Like, so it's not something wild like that, which is a good thing, I think, from a marketing perspective of kind of reaching out to the general masses of beer
Yep.
drinkers.
I agree.
But I don't, from my personal enjoyment of booze, usually this stuff kind of
Yeah. We'll
fails.
see if I can get my hands on it in the future. If I'd imagine it's going to take some time to filter down. Since it's Ontario, it could be as much as maybe even 6 months before it reaches out the market here. But if I can get my hands on it, I'll certainly get my hands on it. And we'll do a call back and see what it's like. That's all I've
For
got
sure.
this week for Libation News. June, you have anything to add this week? All
Nope,
right.
do not.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate all your feedback, listener questions, emails. Of course, you can reach us developingpalates.com. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, if you're listening to this, you're either watching YouTube or you've subscribed to our podcast. Thanks very much. We'll be back next week with some more pour and tell episode. Tip your glass. We'll see you next week.